So, what conclusion did you come to? Grace, who was sitting comfortably on the living room sofa, spoke while jerking her chin toward the waiver of inheritance agreement placed on the table. Behind her, 3 attorneys stood like a wall. This was supposed to be my house, and yet it felt as if I had been summoned to her office. For the past 3 weeks since our grandmother passed away, Grace's relentless messages had been like a storm. Phone calls, emails, and even intimidating certified mail from her attorneys. All of them repeated the same words. You are adopted. Give up the entire inheritance. And when I finally responded that I was willing to talk that day, Grace became fully convinced of her victory. She believed I had yielded to her pressure and had called her to negotiate the terms of the transfer of assets. That was why she brought 3 attorneys with her without hesitation. She continued, I expect you to make a wise decision, Maya. The law values blood ties above all. The $1.2 million Grandma left obviously belongs to me. I looked quietly at her confident face and slowly opened my mouth. Yes, just as you said, I have reached a conclusion. That's why I called you here. I stood up and walked toward the bedroom door at the back of the living room. Before I tell you my conclusion, let me introduce my representatives. When I opened the door, 4 legal experts emerged from inside. Led by my chief attorney, Mr. Clark, they stepped forward and stood firmly in front of Grace's legal team. The confident smile vanished from Grace's face in an instant. She finally realized she had walked straight into a trap. Where we were was not a place of surrender. It was a place of judgment. Grace's attorneys were visibly shaken by the unexpected reinforcement. My representative, Clark, stepped forward before they had a chance to regain their posture. My name is Clark. I am Miss Maya's chief attorney. All the documents you have sent over the past 3 weeks have been reviewed on our end. Clark's voice carried no unnecessary emotion, functioning solely as a tool to convey facts. The lead attorney on Grace's side opened his mouth, trying to maintain his professional dignity. Mr. Clark, then this will be quick. We are here to enforce the rightful claim regarding the estate of Madame Zoe. Due to blood relations? That argument is meaningless. Clark cut him off coldly. Because the information you are relying on is entirely incorrect. He operated the tablet in his hand and transferred the data to the wall-mounted monitor in the living room. On the screen appeared an official contract stamped by an international notary. The domestic assets of $1.2 million you have been focused on do indeed exist. However, Clark slowly looked around the room before continuing. That amount accounts for less than 8% of the total assets owned by Madame Zoe. What did you just say? Grace's voice trembled faintly. Grace's attorneys were desperately tracing the text of the legal documents displayed on the monitor, their expressions filled with disbelief. Clark continued, The true estate of Madame Zoe consists of an international real estate portfolio spanning multiple countries and offshore trust funds. Its total market value currently exceeds $15 million. The weight of the documents displayed on the monitor and the numbers Clark had spoken dominated the room. Grace and her attorneys stood in stunned silence. They finally understood how small and misguided the battle they had initiated truly was. A heavy silence ruled the living room. The figure of $15 million echoed through the room with an almost unreal sound. The first to regain composure was the lead attorney on Grace's side. He attempted to search for any possible counterattack, driven by his professional pride. Very well, assuming such overseas assets indeed exist. Even so, the legal essence remains unchanged. Those assets are also part of Madame Zoe's estate. Therefore, as a blood relative, Miss Grace has the rightful claim to... That is completely incorrect. Clark's voice was as cold as ice. His words halted the attorney's rebuttal. I will repeat myself. Your claims are fundamentally wrong because those assets are no longer part of any estate. Clark operated his tablet again, switching the display on the monitor. What appeared next were transfer contracts, trust establishment documents, corporate registration records. Every one of them bore the clear signature of Grandma. Starting 3 years before her death, Madame Zoe began legally and systematically transferring these assets directly to Miss Maya. Through international trusts and multiple corporate entities, she ensured everything was executed flawlessly. Legally speaking, by the time she passed away, the assets valued at $15 million were no longer her property. They belonged entirely to Miss Maya. Therefore, they are not subject to inheritance at all. It was the statement that signaled the decisive end of this legal drama. The color drained from the faces of Grace's attorneys. The one weapon they believed they held, The law of blood relations had been utterly irrelevant. All transactions had already been completed in a realm far beyond its reach. "No, that can't be." Grace's voice trembled. "Impossible. You manipulated Grandma. You brainwashed her and stole her assets." Grace pointed at me and shouted, overwhelmed by emotion. However, Clark shook his head calmly without changing his expression. Madame Zoe left an extremely clear record explaining why she made that decision. Grace, she left it in the form of your own voice. The moment Clark spoke those words, Grace's expression froze. Her instincts seemed to sense what was about to happen. Clark operated the tablet in his hand and played an audio recording through the living room speakers. It was unmistakably Grace's voice. A frivolous tone, speaking with a friend over the phone. It's the worst. I asked Grandma for a new bag and she started talking about health. I don't have time for that. If she would just hand over her card, it would all be done. Her friend's laughter could be heard on the other end. Grace stared at the speaker as if doubting her own ears. Her attorneys exchanged uneasy glances. The audio continued. She's basically a walking ATM, so I want her to at least fulfill that function. The room grew even colder at the shock of her words. One of Grace's attorneys hurried to raise an objection. Please wait. A recording obtained without consent cannot be used as legal. Consent was obtained. Clark countered immediately. Madame Zoe began recording all conversations in her home years ago to document important decisions regarding her medical care and financial matters. This was done legally under the advice of her attorney. All visitors were notified of the recording system in writing. Without pausing, he played the next audio clip. Maya? Oh, she's still desperately trying to win Grandma's favor. It's hilarious, talking about boring economics and all that. Well, she's adopted, so that's the only way she can try to be liked. But I'm different. I'm the real granddaughter. I have the right to be loved without doing anything. Grace's own voice exposed her insults toward her sister and her baseless sense of entitlement tied to blood relation. Her face was flushed with anger and humiliation. Stop it! Stop that right now! But the merciless presentation of evidence was not finished. Ignoring Grace's cries, Clark played a third audio file. It was the final piece of evidence revealing her true nature. From the speakers, Grace's voice flowed once again, this time mixed with clear frustration and irritation as she spoke to her friend. She won't pay for my trip to Europe. Can you believe that? She's old and she must have plenty of inheritance. Honestly, I wish she'd stop keeping me waiting. It's messing up my life plan. Her friend tried to calm her, but Grace only became more agitated. Because it doesn't make sense. Grandma has been way too soft on Maya lately. She's just an outsider playing pretend family. How can a bloodless adopted stranger be prioritized over me, her real granddaughter? It's completely wrong. Her words sliced through the room like a blade. Grace's true feelings, how deeply she looked down on me and how she viewed our grandmother, were exposed to everyone. Her attorneys no longer had the will to argue. They simply stared at the floor, ashamed of their client's lack of dignity. Grace, her face completely pale, shouted in a trembling voice, "This is wrong. It's malicious editing, a trap to frame me." At that moment, I finally opened my mouth for the first time, after remaining silent until now. Why did you never say a single word of concern for Grandma's health, Grace? My voice was quieter and colder than I expected. Why did every conversation start with you demanding money? Why was there never a single thank you? Grandma waited for it. Before you claimed your rights through blood, she waited for you to show her affection as family? Clark prepared the final audio file, as if to support my words. It was a recording of my own voice. When Clark pressed play, what flowed from the speakers was my gentle voice, filled with genuine care. It was recorded a few weeks ago during a phone call between me and Grandma. Grandma, how are you feeling? I'll drive you to your checkup next week. I worry about you going alone. After that, let's have something good to eat. I'll make a reservation at that Italian restaurant you like. On the other end, Grandma's delighted voice could be heard saying, "Thank you, Maya." Don't worry about it. And about the investment advice you gave me recently? Thank you so much. Thanks to you, I was able to avoid a big problem. You really are the best business partner. Finally, I added, all right, I'll call you again soon. It's getting cold all of a sudden, so keep warm. And please don't push yourself. She responded with clear relief in her voice, and the recording ended. It was just an ordinary daily conversation. But within it were things entirely absent from Grace's recordings. Respect, gratitude, and affection, given without expectation of return. Not a single demand for money. Clark stopped the speaker and looked around the silent room. Madame Zoe kept all of these records. 187 recordings of Grace's monetary demands made over the past 3 years, and countless recordings of Miss Maya's gratitude and concern. There is no longer any question about whom she deemed worthy of entrusting her estate. With that, he turned his gaze toward the lead attorney on Grace's side. Counselors, your arguments have been completely refuted by the evidence. If you choose to remain here any longer, we will formally file lawsuits for defamation and attempted coercion against both you and your client. Clark's ultimatum crushed the fighting spirit of Grace's legal team completely. The lead attorney cast a single glance at Grace. In his eyes, there was no longer any sense of duty as her defender, only contempt. He turned back to Clark and said, "We concede completely. We can no longer act as Miss Grace's representatives in this matter. We shall withdraw immediately." At those words, Grace let out a piercing scream. "What are you talking about? This isn't over. Fight! I paid you a fortune for this." "It is no longer possible, Miss Grace." The attorney's voice rang out rough and unrestrained for the first time. "We can only represent legally justified claims. Your actions can only be described as pure greed. Did you even listen to your own recorded voice? If that is played in court, it will damage our careers as attorneys." One of his colleagues had already begun stuffing documents into his bag. "He's right. Ethically, no lawyer can take on a case like this. I'm out." "You traitors. All of you, how dare you betray me?" Grace's furious screams echoed, but none of them looked back at her now. The lead attorney delivered his final, icy words. "Let me give you some advice. As long as this evidence exists, no reputable legal professional in this country will represent you. Your claims contain neither legitimacy nor any shred of sympathy. Our contract is hereby terminated, effective immediately." With that, they all turned on their heels at once and headed for the front door. As though fleeing from something filthy, they rushed to escape the house as quickly as possible. Grace could do nothing but hurl meaningless curses at their retreating backs. Bang! The door shut mercilessly, and Grace was left completely alone in the living room, with no allies remaining. Legally and socially, every shield that might have protected her had fallen away. She was no longer a warrior burning with anger, but a pitiful, defeated soldier battered by the storm. A sight that faintly reminded me of myself when I first came into this home, and a small ache tugged at my chest. Clark, however, did not spare her even a glance as he delivered the final blow. "Ah, one more thing. There is an important fact we must inform you of, Miss Grace." At his words, Grace jerked her head up. What more could there possibly be? Madame Zoe left exactly one legal action regarding you, a filed request for a restraining order against you. Of course, its legal effect expired upon her death, but the reason for the request remains permanently on record as a matter of public court documentation. Clark turned the tablet screen toward Grace. There, displayed on the screen, was an official document submitted to the court. Reason for filing: persistent and psychologically distressing monetary demands made by the granddaughter Grace, along with numerous self-centered behaviors that threatened the physical and emotional well-being of the elderly grandmother. Naturally, the previously mentioned audio recordings were attached as supporting evidence. It was a legal brand marking the fact that Grace's very presence had been a threat to her grandmother. Grace's knees buckled. She dropped to her hands on the floor, barely preventing herself from collapsing entirely. "No, Grandma. She was against me." She fully anticipated that after her death, you would circle around Miss Maya and cause harm in the manner we witnessed today. This record exists to serve as powerful evidence that you are a potential threat to Miss Maya should you ever attempt any unjust action against her. Do you understand? It was Grandma's final line of defense, a harsh but certain safeguard to protect Maya, and to ensure Grace would not stray further down her destructive path. Grace could no longer utter a single word. She lay collapsed on the floor, releasing nothing but guttural sounds that barely resembled crying. I simply looked down at her in silence. The heavy atmosphere was broken by Clark. From the files that had been resting on the table, he picked up a new one. Even the faintest hint of pity had vanished from his expression. "Miss Grace, we are not finished yet." At Clark's calm voice, Grace's shoulders jerked violently. "You may be thinking, I lost the inheritance, but I still have my career as an influencer. I can earn money on my own." Unfortunately, that outlook also comes to an end today. He opened the file on the table and slid one document forward. It was the founding statement of a charitable foundation established by Grandma during her lifetime. Madame Zoe used a portion of her assets to establish a foundation. Its purpose is to research and expose the harmful influence of fraudulent and deceptive social media on young people, and to support its victims. The last traces of color drained from Grace's face. She was beginning to grasp the terrifying meaning behind Clark's words. And for the Foundation's very first investigation and exposure, one influencer has already been selected. An individual who publicly flaunted a glamorous life and loving family online, while secretly draining money from her elderly grandmother and inflicting psychological harm. You know who that is, don't you? Clark placed side by side a screenshot of Grace's social media posts and the recorded conversations of her monetary demands toward her grandmother. We are prepared to present this evidence to all your sponsor companies and to the FTC as proof that you promoted a fraudulent lifestyle and deceived consumers. Should that occur, you will lose your career, your income sources, and your social credibility entirely. Even the $1.2 million you expected from your grandmother may vanish instantly in the face of claims for damages from your sponsors. It was nothing short of a death sentence. It was a cold declaration that stripped away her past, her present, and even her future. Grace no longer had the will to resist, nor even the strength to scream. Her career, her identity itself, collapsed before her eyes with a deafening silence. She stared blankly at a single spot on the floor. Clark looked down at her coolly, then turned on the large monitor in the living room. And now this is truly the final piece. The last testimony Madame Zoe left behind, both for you and for the court. The screen displayed the image of Grandma lying in a hospital bed just a few weeks before her death. Her face was worn by illness, yet her eyes still held a firm, unwavering will. The date stamp showed it was recorded only 3 days before her passing. She looked toward the camera and began speaking in a frail but unmistakably clear voice. I am recording this video as a supplement to my will. I wish to state, with my own words, why I have chosen to entrust the majority of my assets to my granddaughter Maya, with whom I share no blood, and why I have chosen to leave only a small portion to my biological granddaughter Grace. Grandma took a deep breath. Grace, I loved you. When you were born, I felt as if I were ascending to heaven, but somewhere along the way you stopped seeing me as your grandmother and began seeing me only as a convenient source of money. Zoe's gaze through the camera pierced Grace directly. When was the last time you worried about my health? When was the last time you said thank you to me from your heart? When was the last time you spoke to me without mentioning money? Sadly, I cannot remember. Not for many years. Those words struck Grace's chest more sharply than any legal document or audio evidence. It was a direct accusation from the grandmother she claimed to love. It was the heaviest possible verdict on her wrongdoing. That is why I made my decision. Leaving you an inheritance would only further corrupt you and lead you to ruin. This is not punishment. It is the final and most painful form of love I can give you. A single tear traced down Grandma's cheek in the video. When the message ended, the living room fell into a silence as heavy as a grave. The tear on the monitor would surely become an eternal mark burned into Grace's heart. I slowly approached the hollow, broken Grace. Then I began to speak softly of a story she had never known, one shared only between Grandma and me. Do you remember the day I was brought into this home when I was 8? You kept asking our parents, why does that girl have a different last name? I felt like I wasn't anyone at all. I was terrified and cried in the corner of my room. Grace's shoulders trembled faintly. That was when Grandma came to my room. She didn't say anything. She just sat beside me and stroked my back until I stopped crying, for hours. And when I finally looked up, she said, blood is just red water. Family is made right here. And she tapped gently over her heart. I placed my hand softly over my own chest. From that moment on, she taught me how vast the world is. About finance, about history, and that wealth must be carried with responsibility. She didn't leave me her money. She entrusted me with the legacy of her entire life. She chose me not because of blood, but because of the bond of hearts. I looked directly into Grace's eyes and spoke clearly. When you were begging Grandma for money, I was receiving her wisdom and her love. When you were asking for designer goods to decorate yourself on social media, I was learning the knowledge needed to protect and grow her assets. What you lost was not the inheritance, Grace. You were born into this house, but you chose to throw away the chance to become Grandma's family in the true sense. It was the story of another inheritance, one Grace could never obtain. A story about the real treasure her own greed had blinded her from seeing or hearing. The moment I finished speaking, a sound escaped Grace's lips, a wordless scream of despair, the first she had let out. It was not a cry over losing the inheritance. It was the death rattle of someone who had finally realized, down to the marrow of her bones, how foolish and empty her life had been. The last fortress of her heart had been utterly destroyed. As if her scream were a signal, Clark quietly gave me a nod and left the room without a sound, together with his team. This too was the final page of the script Grandma had written. The ending of the sisters' story was to be faced by the two of us alone. Soon, only Grace collapsed on the floor, and I remained in the living room. She no longer had the will to cry or scream. She only stared into the void. I picked up the final envelope from the table and placed it gently before her. "Read it. It's Grandma's last letter to you." Grace, like a soulless doll, slowly reached out, broke the seal, and opened it. Written upon the stationery was the familiar, elegant, yet steel-strong handwriting of our grandmother. "To my dear Grace, if you are reading this letter, then you must be facing the natural consequences of your own actions. Why did I choose not to leave you the majority of my estate? It was not because I hated you. It was simply because you were not qualified. That is all." "Qualified?" A dry laugh escaped Grace's lips. "A dead woman acting so superior." Muttering curses under her breath, she continued reading the letter. "Wealth is a mirror that reflects a person's true nature, and your mirror showed nothing but greed, selfishness, and a lack of respect. If I were to give you immense wealth, that mirror would only destroy you. I could not allow what I built over my lifetime to be squandered for your vanity. The domestic assets you will receive are not an opportunity. They are the final measure of your character. Whether you choose to spend that money to decorate yourself again, or choose a path where you stand on your own feet, your true nature will be revealed in how you use it." "What is that supposed to mean?" Grace muttered it like a child being lectured, her voice full of irritation. In her mind, Grandma's words did not sound like truth, but merely cruelty. "Destroy me? No, you destroyed me." The letter ended with words stripped of all mercy. Greed can never qualify someone for inheritance. Only love and respect can. This is the final lesson I leave you. After finishing the letter, Grace crushed it in her hand with an audible crack. When she raised her face again, what escaped her lips was not a sob. "Why?" It was not the cry of someone lamenting her mistakes. It was the tantrum of a child angry that the world had not bent to her will, an ugly scream filled with rage and self-pity. I turned my back to her and quietly left the living room. Which path she would choose from then on? The answer was already obvious. I closed the door, leaving Grace alone with her hatred and the final truth her grandmother had thrust before her. 2 years passed after that day. With the assets entrusted to me by Grandma, I established a foundation dedicated to education and sustainable technologies, carrying on her legacy. It was the embodiment of her teaching. Wealth is not only to be protected and grown, but used for the future. And Grace, what became of her? I found out through the whispers carried on by the wind. She never understood Grandma's final advice. She saw the remaining $1.2 million not as a last chance, but as war funds to reclaim what she believed had been stolen from her. She poured every cent into shady international lawyers and filed 3 hopeless lawsuits across 3 different countries. The result was predictable. The legal fees devoured her resources in an instant, leaving her with nothing but crushing debt. Recently, a tiny article appeared on the corner of a gossip website. Grace, once a popular influencer, had gone bankrupt and is now living in a small, cheap apartment, working customer support for an online store. A faceless, nameless job. The very kind of life she had always looked down upon. I closed the article quietly and looked up at the sky outside my window. The true inheritance from Grandma was never the $15 million. It was the responsibility for the future she entrusted to me and the inevitable conclusion that Grace demonstrated with her own life. There was not a single flaw in Grandma's plan. Everything took place perfectly, even 2 years later.